our time on this planet. Courage, Tenderness, and Valeria Luiselli. That's how you say it? I always said Luiselli, but not sure. Anyhow, so first and foremost, I'd really like to give my appreciation to Adriana, to Addie, to Linda, Dami, to my co-panelists, and to everyone that's here. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend tonight with us. Okay, so first and foremost, I get to kind of share my excitement with getting to talk about Valeria Luiselli and her work. As I come back to this library, the Logan Heights Library, I can't help but think of my little tiny Rosie that was 10, 11 years old, and I used to make my way across the street. I used to live on 28th Street, and I used to walk over to the Logan Heights Library, the old one. And then I thought to myself, what was what was one book, what was one children's book that really kind of shaped me? And I don't know if maybe some of you that are around my age, you might remember this book, especially since I'm with book people here, I think, right? I don't know if anybody remembers this book, Salven mi selva, Save My Rainforest. I think of this book because we're going to be talking about a novel that centers children and centers children's curiosity and children's first moments of courage, right? So as you look through the list, I want you to use the list as sort of like almost like attached to hopefully the book that you'll get to, that you could be inspired to read, right? Because that's the purpose of us being here. All right, so now let's talk about Valeria Luiselli. Okay, all right. So one of the first things that this book does, very beautiful, is the title of the book is Lost Children Archive, right? And one of the things that Luiselli does really, really beautiful is to make us think about what constitutes an archive, and really takes us to thinking that our whole bodies, our whole self, our whole life experience is really, we're walking archives, right? We collect memories, we remember very vividly every impactful event in our lives. And so I'm gonna read a little bit about first of all, to me, right, I've taught this novel a few times I in my literature classes. This novel is really, really about the right to move, to relocate, to migrate, for better working conditions, or merely just survival. When I think of the archive as well, I'm thinking of Valeria Luiselli first encountered the issue or the situation of children in detention centers as she was working as a translator in the courts in New York. And she experienced and learned firsthand the situations of children in these detention centers, she realized that she needed to do something about it, that she needed to write. So she began to attempt to write the novel, but she realized that she couldn't remain so-called objective, right? That it was just, there was so much anger in her. And so she decided to instead write the book of essays, which the book is completely kind of formatted on the 21 questions or a questionnaire that the lawyers that she worked with asked the children in detention centers, concerning their situations. And this questionnaire would kind of define or allow the lawyers to see if they had a case, if they could defend, the child, in that situation. And so I'm going to read a little bit from here, just to get a sense of the kind of courage that she had as someone who meant, and worked for this children. So I'm going to read a little bit on the 21, the tell me how it ends, okay? So here she's talking about writing back home after a day of doing translation work. My niece and I almost always leave immigration court in silence. We leave the brutal and exceptional reality of the stories we heard and translated that day and step into the business as usual reality of the city. The hum of the crowded streets, the sirens, the subways screeching when it comes to a halt. Sometimes, only sometimes, while we ride the subway back, we tell each other pieces of the stories we heard during the day. Telling stories doesn't solve anything, doesn't resemble broken lives, but perhaps it is a way of understanding the unthinkable. If a story haunts us, we keep telling it to ourselves, replaying it in silence, while we shower, while we walk alone down the streets, or in our moments of insomnia. I'm gonna now read to you a little bit from the novel, right? That she was out, finally able to finish. It's a really hefty novel. It's really long. I don't want that to deter you from, diving into it. Students, especially my students, were like, "Oh my gosh, this lady's gonna have us read this huge book. She's crazy." And I'm like, hold on, you're gonna get into it. You're gonna be all about it soon. Anyhow, let me get into the second reading, which is on archives. Okay. Oops, now it's working. Okay. Again, the use of what is the archive, and the use of memory as our archives, and how we carry them with us. She says about the archives, "I don't keep a journal. My journals are the things I underline in books. I would never lend a book to anyone after having read it. I underline too much, sometimes entire pages, sometimes with double underline. My husband and I read this copy of Sontag's journal together. We had just met. Both of us underlined entire passages of it enthusiastically, almost feverishly. We read out loud, taking turns, opening the pages, as if consulting an oracle, legs naked and intertwined on a twin bed. I suppose that words, timely arranged, in the right order, produce an afterglow. When you read books, words like that in a book, beautiful words, a powerful but fleeting emotion ensues. And you know that soon it'll all be gone. The concept you just grasped and the emotion it produced. Then comes a need to possess that strange ephemeral afterglow and to hold on to that emotion. So you reread, underline, and perhaps even memorize and transcribe the words somewhere in a notebook, on a napkin, on your hand. In our copy of Sontag's journals, underlined once, twice, sometimes boxed in and marked at the margins. One of the main social functions of a journal or diary is precisely to be read furtively by other people, the people like parents and lovers about whom one has been cruelly honest only in the journal. In a time hollowed out by decorum, one must school oneself in spontaneity. Moral bookkeeping requires a settling of accounts. And, the word morality, moral accounting, right, then kind of takes me to another concept on her work, which is, courage, right, and how to have courage. Let me read to you another passage. Because both of these texts kind of go hand in hand. They're kind of one body, I believe, right? Part of her memory work. There's a point in which she talks about the very first time that she met she's a mother, right? In the novel, the novel doesn't give us names. It just gives us mother, dad, son, daughter, right? So let me read to you this part, okay? Bear with me. Tongue ties. When the girl was 4 and had started going to public school, she prematurely lost a tooth. Immediately after that, she started stuttering. We never knew if the events were in fact casually related: school, tooth, stutter. But in our familiar narrative, at least, the three things got tied together in a confusing, emotionally charged knot. One morning during our last winter in New York, I had a conversation with the mother of one of my daughter's classmates. We were in the auditorium waiting to vote for new parent representatives. The two of us stood in line for a while, exchanging stories about our children's linguistic and cultural stalemates. My daughter had stuttered for a year, I told her, sometimes to the point of non-communication. She'd begin every sentence like she was about to sneeze. She had recently discovered that if she sang a sentence instead of speaking it, it would come out without the stutter. And so slowly she had been growing out of her stuttering. Her son, she told me, had not said a word in almost 6 months, not in any language. We asked each other about the places we were from and the languages that we spoke at home. They were from Tlaxiaco in the Mixteca, she told me. Her first language was Trique. I had never heard Trique, and the only thing I knew about it was that it was one of the most complex tonal languages. With more than 8 tones, my grandmother was Ñañu and spoke Otomi, a simpler tonal language than Trique, with only 3 tones. But my mother didn't learn that, I said, and of course I didn't learn it either. When I asked her if her son could speak Trique, she told me no, of course not, she said. And then I, following Luiselli's obsession with boxing and underlining and circling, I, triple underlined this passage. Our mothers teach us to speak and the world teaches us to shut up. So eventually this is what she develops a friendship with this woman. And she learns that the daughters are actually being brought to the United States by Coyote, right? So let me read to you a little bit about that, okay? Let me just read the entire thing because that's the only way it's going to make sense. After we bought it, right before saying goodbye, we introduced ourselves, though it should have been the other way around. Her name was Manuela, the same as my grandmother's name. She found the coincidence less amusing than I did. I asked her if she might be willing to let me record her one day and told her about the sound documentary my husband and I were almost finishing working on. We had not yet sampled Trique, and it was a rare language to come by. She agreed hesitantly, and when we met in the park next to the school a few days later, she said she would ask for one thing in exchange for this. She had 2 older daughters, 8 and 10 years old, who had arrived in the country, crossing the border on foot, and were being held in a detention center in Texas. She needed someone to translate their documents from Spanish to English at little or no cost so she could find a lawyer to defend them from being deported. I agreed, without knowing what I was getting myself into. First, it was just translating legal papers, the girls' birth certificates, vaccination records, one school report card. Then there were a series of letters written by a neighbor back home addressed to Manuela, giving a detailed account of the situation there. The untamable waves of violence, the army, the gangs, the police, the sudden disappearance of people, mostly young women and girls. Then one day, Manuela asked me to go to a meeting with a potential lawyer. And so this is the manner in which she actually gets involved in following the situation of children in detention centers on the border, right? I'm going to skip a little bit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about untenderness, right? And where tenderness is at in the novel, and how is it used, how is it deployed, right? One of the most beautiful things that Luiselli does is that she centers the voices of children. She centers the experiences of children. So I'm going to read a little bit about that, right? The only thing that parents can really give their children are little knowledges. This is how you cut your own nails. This is the temperature of a real hug. This is how you untangle knots in your hair. This is how I love you. And what children give their parents in return is something less tangible, but at the same time larger and more lasting. Something like a drive to embrace life fully and understand it on their behalf, so that they can try to explain it to them, pass it down to them with acceptance and without rancor, as James Baldwin once wrote, but also with a certain rage and fierceness. Children force parents to go out looking for a specific pulse, a gaze, a rhythm, the right way of telling the story, knowing that stories don't fix anything or save anyone, but maybe make the world both more complex and more tolerable. And sometimes, just sometimes, more beautiful. Stories are a way of subtracting the future from the past, the only way of finding clarity in hindsight. And the last part I want to read about is, oops, it's the wrong one. Unlost Children, right? After all, this novel is about children in detention centers, but I think also Valeria Luiselli is urging us to tap on our childhood, listen to, the children in our lives. And also, when she mentions lost children, that like, that we get the children, out of the detention centers, right? In that we abolish detention centers, right? In that that we treat all children like we would treat our own, right? Okay, so let me read the last part, because I know that we have to move along. Actually, you know what? I don't think I'm gonna read the last part, because I don't want to read the end, because I want you to read the novel. So instead, I think I'm gonna read a part from Tell Me How It Ends, and this is something one of the young refugee one of the adolescents that she worked with, right? Still a child, right? He had Miguel Hernandez elegy, right? And this was about the death of his childhood friend. I want to gnaw at the earth with my teeth. I want to take the earth apart bit by bit with dry, burning bites. I want to mine the earth until I find you and kiss your noble skull and unshroud you and return you. And last but not least, I'd like to end my reading of Valeria Luiselli's work with another grand from Latin America, Eduardo Galeano, who wrote also, perhaps one day our world won't be upside down, and then we will say to any newborn human being, welcome, come in, enter. The entire earth will be your kingdom. Your legs will be your passport, valid forever. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I also want to thank the team here, Adi, Jennifer, Linda, Anthony, and Sherwood. Shout out. Thank you to my compañeras aquí. I'm really honored to be here with them. And thank you for Rosi for really beautifully talking about the themes of these books by Valeria. So as Adi mentioned, my name is América, and I just thought I would also share a little bit about me. Before I kind of get into some of what stood out to me and some of the connections that I'd like to make. But to start, I am the granddaughter of my abuelita, who was a tobacco farm worker in Nayarit, and the daughter of two immigrant parents that crossed multiple borders because of poverty and poor living conditions. Upon arrival, my parents were also undocumented for some years. Their struggle really has shaped my trajectory up until this point, and what has brought me to be here in this room with all of you today. So I thought I would share that with all of you, kind of contextualizing why I'm here. And I wanted to start with this quote. Let me see. It's on there? Okay. Yeah. This quote, and this is from the song. Maybe you recognize it. It's from Anita Tijoux and Rebel Diaz. It's called Va Caer, Iba Caer. And I wanted to start off with this because it's probably the first song and the last song and probably somewhere in the middle that I play for my students. And I wanted to start off with kind of like the spirit of this song, a part of the song that says, que se caigan sus fronteras, sus guerras. La tierra pertenece a quien la libera. Y va a caer, y va a caer, y va a caer. And so I kind of wanted to start here because it gives a sense of hope and resistance, a chant of telling those in power that they will fall. Those people in power and the structures in power that have marginalized and oppressed communities. And so that's kind of like where I wanted to start. And I also wanted to start by prefacing a little bit about the colonial legacies. And Dr. Kelly Lairo Hernandez, the author of Migra, states that the roots of the Border Patrol had begun as a white supremacist police organization. And racial terror had been foundational to its origins. It's founded on the repression and brutality of non-white populations. And a little bit of the history of the Border Patrol is that it's very much connected to the Texas Rangers. They were created for the sole purpose of protecting Anglo settlers and their quote unquote property. And Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, another author, really points that they were, the Texas Rangers served to destroy Native towns, attempted to eliminate Native people, pursuing ethnic cleansing and repressing Mexicans. The Texas Rangers also served as a way to re-enslave Black people. So as a whole, they were anti-immigrant, anti-indigenous, and anti-Black. And a lot of these Texas Rangers had later joined the ranks of what is now to be known as a Border Patrol. So the Border Patrol, in essence, is connected to organizations like the KKK. And as I mentioned, this institution of racism and brutality. So to this point, and much broadly, I would like to introduce another book that I also recommend, which is Border and Rule by Harsha Walia. And she succinctly states, U.S.-Mexico border's early formation is entangled in terrors of territorial expansion, indigenous genocide, anti-Black enslavement, and racialized expulsion. And this is just some of the origins. And these brutal organizations that are still living and breathing today, ICE and CBP combined, I think it's important to note that they also receive $25 billion annually and additional funds, right? So I just wanted to start with contextualizing a little bit of the history. If I turn to the next one. There we go. All right, so thinking about additional colonial legacies, separating families is an American tradition. I took some of these from article titles, Barbaric, America's Cruel History of Separating Children from Their Parents. And when we think about the colonial legacies here, indigenous children were kidnapped and forced into white boarding, so-called schools. And during enslavement, it was actually policy to kidnap and forcibly remove Black children from their families, who were then to be sold. When we look at what is happening and what has happened in today's history, recent events, these are the historical legacies of the U.S. And it's important to understand these roots to then better fight this system today. And so today what we see is state sanctions, these separations as a tactic. And when implementing family separations at the border, this was done knowingly that it would cause enormous harm. And it was a strategy to try to deter families and children seeking asylum, their human right. All right. And I just wanted to also mention that this is clearly a brutal and cruel enforcement. Also drawing from Harsha Walia's book, she notes that since 2017, 5,400 children had been separated from their caregivers at the border. 89% were from Guatemala and Honduras, and at least 207 were babies under the age of 5. Young children had been described having devastating symptoms like, quote, every heartbeat hurts, or, quote, I can't feel my heart. And so reports show that in these cases, migrant children were taken from their families and their parents, who were then deported and are still missing. As of June of this year, over 300 migrant children are still separated from their families. And the image on your right is an image of indigenous children, Jacqueline, Claudia, and Felipe, who a lot of us might be familiar with their stories and whose lives were stolen and were murdered by and in the hands of the state. And so our fight is to never forget and to continue to dismantle these systems that took their lives. And I wanted to read a little bit from the book before I get to my next slide. But this one is kind of, Valeria is kind of telling the journey of children once they're placed in what is known as la hielera or icebox. And so I'm just going to start from, tell me how this ends. And she says, as soon as a child in the custody of Border Patrol officials, he or she is placed in a detention center commonly known as la hielera or the icebox. The icebox derives its name from the fact that the children in it are under ICE custody. The name also points out the fact that the detention centers along with the border are a kind of enormous refrigerator for people, constantly blasted with gelid air as if to ensure that the foreign meat doesn't go bad too quickly. Naturally, it must be harboring all sorts of deadly germs. The children are treated more like carriers of diseases than children. In July 2015, for example, the American Immigration Lawyers Association filed a complaint after learning that in detention center in Dilley, Texas, 250 children were mistakenly given adult strength hepatitis A vaccinations. The children became gravely ill and had to be vaccinated. And so I also thought about, maybe you had also heard about what had happened in terms of the forced sterilization of immigrant women happening in Georgia in the detention center. And these are ongoing forms of genocide inflicted by the state. And as I was reading, this is what I kind of connected it to, this idea that these Black, brown, immigrant, refugee children are somehow pollutants. And in the history of the United States, the forced sterilization of women, particularly Black, Indigenous, Mexican, Puerto Rican, and women of color, is very tied to the U.S. So I just wanted to show a couple of pictures there. Let me see. And then also just kind of talking about the connections between the United States and the Mexican Southern Border Program and a little bit about BORTAC. I wanted to point to how the U.S. has also been funneling millions to the Mexican government. The Mexican government is also complicit. We can think about Plan Mérida, and now via the Mexican Southern Border Program to control the Mexican government, which is also perpetuating and enforcing the same anti-Indigenous, anti-Black, anti-migrant refugee practices, and is getting the funding from the United States so that they can control, halt the migration before they even get to the border at the United States. In terms of BORTAC, maybe some of you may or may not be familiar. This is short for Border Patrol Tactical Unit, and it's a just Border Patrol unit. Todd Miller, he's the author of Border Patrol Nation and Empire of Borders, points to how BORTAC, controlled by the US, is being sent to Guatemala, and they're training the police there in order for them to then control and try to stop the migrants. And he says, Guatemala is one example over 100 examples in the country all over the world where US Border Patrol, specifically BORTAC, are going and doing training, spending resources, creating border patrols, teaching other countries how to control their borders, and this whole idea of pushing out the US borders. So according to the mission of stopping people from even coming to the US. And it's really interesting because BORTAC, from doing research, BORTAC actually started as a way to repress uprisings happening in detention centers. So the connections even there. Again, they train, equipped, and there's construction of military. So the heavy militarization to continue to kill, brutalize immigrants and refugees. They're continuing to fortify their borders, attempting to stop refugees and immigrants from the same brutal conditions that were created by capitalism, white supremacy, US policies, fueling instability, and US intervention that have heavily played a role in displacing communities. And I also wanted to talk about the connections between Border Patrol, police, and ICE. I wanted to point to these connections as they are all part of the militarizing policing system that suppress and terrorize the life of Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. And I wanted to start off with these photos. The first is a CBP working with SD police, and the other is a U.S. Border Patrol working in conjunction with the El Paso police. Both were working together to suppress the protesters against, they were protesting the murder of George Floyd. In the picture on your right, you will see how SD Border Patrol is posing in full gear on the steps of the community memorial for George Floyd, and was taken after the firing of the lethal tear gas and rubber-coated steel bullets into the crowd, as you might all remember in La Mesa. So these are examples of these deadly collaborations, and they are large in scale and are extensive. And it's, kind of pointing to the additional examples. We see how the Department of Homeland Security was actually deployed among many of the protests happening, protesting the murder of George Floyd, from Minneapolis to Portland to Washington. And this is the same group that raided humanitarian medical camps. And I think it's so important to also note that this is the same repressive institution that is being sent out to repress the protesters in Line 3, the water protesters. And again, this is the same agency sanctioned by the state to brutalize and suppress that immigrants and refugees are facing. And they share similar colonial technology and tactics, such as tear gas, a chemical weapon that is not only used against Palestinians, but also used against protesters marching for Black Lives Matter, and the same used against Central American families and children. And so for all these reasons, it's important to note that this struggle against white supremacy, this is a struggle against white supremacy, and the forces are international and interconnected. And then this is one of my last slides, talking about kind of like what to do. Valeria and compañera, you talk about what to do with that anger, and thinking about my anger and thinking about what to do with it. And so one of the things that my commitments is to continue to build spaces of solidarity and action along Compas. And let me see here. These are at City College. These are just two of the campaigns that we have worked on. And the first one is currently we don't have Dreamer Centers institutionalized. Mm-hmm. And so, considering the fact that these systems are connected, these systems affect our students, affect our communities. These were something that were really important for us. And so, again, as I mentioned, the first is to demand that our Dreamer Resource Centers be institutionalized, that our students have these resources available to them, and have full-time counselors and full-time staffing. That has yet to be met by the Board of Supervisors. And the other was a campaign to defund the police, knowing that these two forces are working together. We kind of push forward these campaigns. Currently, the San Diego City College District funds $8 million to their police. And so, imagine all the things that could be done with that amount of funds for our students and communities. So that's kind of like where I wanted to end, but I also wanted to point that I was talking to my compañera here earlier and kind of tying it back to that first quote, "Iba a caer." And compañera here, she's like, building solidarity and building community are ways that que va a caer, it will fall, right? So these are some of the actions that are happening this week, and these are some of the organizations that you all might want to, it's not out there anymore, but there were some organizations to kind of get involved with. So thank you. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me in the room? Sometimes I feel like I'm talking loud, but I'm not talking loud. And I always don't know. Well, gracias. Thank you for everybody being here. Sometimes I speak a little Chicana y me sale lo español, so disculpen. Pero gracias por estar aquí esta noche, por acompañarnos. Thank you for being here and accompanying us this evening. Again, my name is Imwa Luna. And I guess antes de empezar, just want to be able to share just a little bit about myself. So I'm part of this collective, Detention Resistance. We've been active since 2018, since the migrant caravans started being more intensely making their trajectory up north. And we developed this organization. It's not a nonprofit, so everything we do is completely volunteer run. We didn't want to, and it's intentionally like that, because at the same time, I don't want to get paid for the work that I do. This is work that everybody should be doing at some level, whatever people's comforts are. So I share that in that respect. This is also a very abolitionist organization. It's very very horizontal, anti-patriarchal. And I say that because it's also, it could be seen as anti-government. And I want to be transparent in that way to be able to also shed light to the trajectory that América shared the history of this nation and why that is, and just being able to bring those connections, share some testimonial. I was able to read these books as well, and it really woke in a lot of sentimiento regarding especially the 40 questions, because we tend to ask a lot of questions to the people that we work alongside and the Otay Mesa Detention Center. And I'll share a little bit about that. I got very involved with doing this work. I was also an undocumented child brought in as a 5-year-old coming to the US. I passed using my sister's papers. And that's how I came here. My parents, during those times, they were able to cross the border very easily. And it's not until these recent policies that has become extremely difficult. So I have family members that have, especially in Denver, that lived all their lives here. And they came when they were children to work, to provide to support their families in Mexico, but haven't been able to go back because of their legality. And it saddens me because many of my tios, my uncles, are not able to see their loved ones, see their parents pass away. Their primos or the lands that they left to be able to provide a better living situation for their communities. And they've been working all their lives here. And that could be something that's shared among many of us, always working to help our loved ones. I have, my father is incarcerated. So I've been very involved also with the abolition, not just of detention centers, but prisons. So that gave me the lens of how prisons work, how they operate, and just doing the monthly visitations. Then it became 3 months and then 6 months. And now I started, one of my passions in doing the detention work was doing visitations. And right now we stopped doing visitations until because of COVID. So we've been focusing a lot more on the hotline. And I think we have a compañera here, if I'm not mistaken. But she's one of the main people that maintains that hotline every single day. Her name is Ruth. So I just want to acknowledge her in the room. But she is one of the compañeras that maintains a hotline where compañeros inside the detention center can call any day to talk to somebody. So comenzamos. Oh, I'm the one that has to do the clicks. I forgot. So these are just some images, the trajectory to the border. These were taken in 2000 and 18 by a compa from Pueblos Sin Fronteras, Jeff Valenzuela. And Pueblos Sin Fronteras, this is how our collective initiated. We were a committee of this organization. They are a lucrative organization, nonprofit in Mexico, and they basically accompany migrants all the way from the Guatemala border to the U.S. So these images were literally from that trajectory, that ese camino that many migrants take to be able to acompañarlos. And the history of these caravans have been ongoing. It didn't start in 2018. They've been happening during Semana Santa for many, many years, at least 15 years. These caravans were there. It was not started because of the Trump era or these policies, but the Trump era highlighted these caravans so much more. But this is how migrants were able to protect themselves, by being visible amongst the communities. So they were able to pass through a clear passage to the border. So this is something that's not new. 2018 just highlighted it in an international scale that has always been ongoing since a long time. Our families have always migrated. Generations have always migrated. So it's not something new. Yeah, that doesn't click. Mm-hmm. I know, we have a clicker. But the next image, and once we get it up there, is also to share light doing the work within the detention center Alta Mesa, which is not a children's detention center, just to be able to be clear. It's an adult detention center. The majority are men, and a very small percentage of them are women. San Diego's closest youth detention center is up in North County, which is the closest detention center for youth, but we don't have one here, particularly in San Diego. And many of these detention centers are on the outskirts of many of these cities because they don't want people to actually go make noise in front of these detention centers. So it takes at least an hour or two to go to these far distance detention centers just to be able to see loved ones or be able to mobilize and make actions. It takes time. So this action happening this weekend, tomorrow and Thursday, it takes around from here a 30-minute drive just to be able to go to this particular detention center. But they're strategically organized in that way to not be able to support and provide more visibility of the detention centers that are in the U.S. There are over 200 detention centers in the U.S. Oh, it works?
It was.
Okay. But I can talk. There's. Okay. But just to share with this particular image, this was also in 2021. This was very recent, and this is regarding the Diaman Gap. So just being able to also bring visibility that migrants that are coming to the U.S.-Mexico border are not migrants that are just in Central America. They're people from all over the world. There's also a population of migrants that are not being discussed or touched a lot, besides our Haitian brothers and siblings, but also migrants from Africa that cross around 14 different borders just to be able to get to the U.S.-Mexico border. And one of their trajectories is the jungle between Panama and Colombia. That's a very dangerous gap that requires more than 100 miles to be able to cross. So just knowing that this is an issue that touches on a global scale. This is not something that's just a North American issue problem. This is a migration problem on a world scale. And there's migrants from hundreds of populations within the detention center. And when we go to the detention center and we hear these voices, there's people from Russia, from Haiti, from West Burkina Faso, Ghana, Venezuela también. There's people from all over the world within this particular detention center. And this is just an example of just how many more migrants are detained in different detention centers in the U.S. So this is just to highlight the need, the desperation that's not just happening, particularly in Central America, even though the majority of children that are coming along the border are from Central America. But there are children and families coming from different parts of the world as well.
We'll get the next slide.
Pero voy a continuar porque solo want the time que termine. Oh, there you go.
Is that the next?
Okay, you can go to the next one.
The next one? That one?
And then the other one. Okay, I can start. Okay. So, yeah, it works now. Okay. So as I mentioned, we started in 2018. We are a collective of just activists, organizers in the community. And we started through just the demand of just so much things happening at the border. We've been active politically at the border, but and we organized a huge donation drive, actually based at the Centro Cultural de Raza. But there are so many families that are coming over, so many community members that are coming over, and we decided that we needed to leave Pueblos Sin Fronteras and create our own specific collective that just focuses on being more attentive and documenting what's happening inside the Otay Mesa Detention Center. In 2018, it was more difficult to visit people. The people inside needed to write our names before we were able to visit. Now it's much more easier to do visitations prior to COVID. But during the time that we were able to do the visitations, that's when we were able to realize there's a huge need to document what's happening inside the detention center. So one of the focuses of our collectives is to document the human rights abuses that happen inside the detention center. During the pandemic, I'll share more. Next slide. Okay. Okay. No, está bien. Just trying to not lose my train of thought.
Is it better if you go to the next slide instead of clicking?
Okay. No. It's perfectly fine. So what we do as a collective, we accompany compas inside the detention center. So we recently, through the COVID, the coronavirus, we created a hotline.
Is the right slide?
Yeah. We created a hotline where compas are able to call us. So we just purchased a Google phone, and that's how compas are able to call. And through there, we get their permission to be able to record these recordings. So they give us a permission to be able to bring these more visibility to their stories, to their what is it that they want to ask or request. Many of them have organized themselves, have written letters to Governor Newsom, have written letters to our local officials here. So we tend to organize around also to support them around their needs. But really, the hotline has provided a bridge to be able to talk to them directly, to hear and document also what's happening inside the detention center. So during the coronavirus, there was times where they were sharing a lot of the human rights abuses that were happening during that trajectory between March and June. So I think we reached, a month, around 3,000 calls in a month. And during those calls, I think that's the biggest documentation of audio files that we have. But many of it was a lot of desperation for people wanting to leave because they were scared about them getting sick, not being able to see their loved ones, not being able to connect to their children. So there's a lot of calls that were really, it was really hard. During that time, we had a lot more volunteers that were present, that were supporting the ongoing support. But this is something that we still do. Detention centers have been there. This one here in San Diego has been here since 1998. The organization that runs this detention center is Core Civic. And Core Civic has been one of the largest for-profit organizations in the U.S. and even in the world. Mm-hmm. They changed their name to it was CCA, and now it's Core Civic. And it's one of the biggest organizations, for-profit organizations, that not just runs detention centers, but also prisons. And if any of you guys know anybody in a prison or detention center, it's very expensive just to be able to make a call. It costs a lot of money to make a call. To make an international call, it costs a lot of money. To be able to buy food or be able to call their lawyers, everything, they have to buy their own envelopes, their own stamps. Nothing is free. They're able to work within the detention center by earning $1 a day by doing different jobs within the detention center. And that's the only way, if they have no connections to the outside world, that's the only way they're able to acquire some money to be able to make phone calls or to be able to send letters to people on the outside. So it's a very anxious time for many people inside detention center. And the difference sometimes is worse in the prison. Many of the compas share is because they don't know when they're going to get out. There's no date. So there's compas, particularly here at the detention center in Otay Mesa, that have been here for 5 years, 2 years. I think that one has been there more than 7 years. But they've been ongoing, appealing their cases because they want to stay here, and trying to acquire a lawyer as well. And it's just the lack of resources and connection. It's so difficult. The CORSEBIC has made it very impossible for the compas to be able to receive any outside help. So everything is we're learning how to navigate how the detention centers work and how better to support people detained. I know. I think I'm going to give up on the PowerPoint. Yes, está bien. But just to also share that the work that we do is most here in San Diego, but we also realize the bigger connections. And through that work in the detention center, we realized the different type of compas that come to the U.S. border. And it's not a one-size story. There's many stories, many people that have also been lost and within the system. So having children also not being able to be found, lost within the system. There's also many compas that have migrated to US that are lost within the system. We don't know if they've been deported. We don't know if they've been transfers. During COVID, many migrants were transfers to many detention centers in Florida and Texas, and then transferred back. And it's not until they call us and let us know, hey, we're back here again. But it's also this inhumane aspect of not knowing where compas are. And it's also really something that touched me within this book is that there's so many compas, migrants that make this trajectory. And there's so many people that we don't know that are lost. Many people that disappear, and we don't know their names. We don't know where the pueblos that they come from. We don't know their family members, if there's somebody waiting for them at home. And there's so many people also searching for their loved ones. Right now, we have a huge, I think, pandemic in Mexico with so many people disappear and the government not able to do nothing about it or being implicated within these disappearances. I'm not sure if there's also something that in 2010, there was a massacre, the San Fernando massacre in Tamaulipas of 72 migrants being assassinated and killed. There's all these different things, but that are happening on a global scale. And I think something that we are very mindful within the work that we do is that the work does not just start the moment people cross into the US and forget what happens down south. We need to make these connections on all these levels. These borders are the continued militarization that's happening, the continued deterrence of making our loved ones go to the deserts. They're strategically put in place to have people not come. The government are all implicated in having many of our loved ones die in the desert, dying, making these trajectory journeys up to the US. So just to be able to give that seed, esa semillita, to know that we need to make these connections and we need to, something that nos da mucha rabia and impulso is to be able to, we need to find out those stories. We need to know where are those people that are lost that we once knew and no longer can be found. Where are they? And I wish that there are more agency from the government to be able to document, but even the ICE does not document everything. It was also strange to see within the book is that in question number 7, when Valeria asks the child, it's like, what happened? Did something happen during your trajectory to the US? And she felt very shameful asking this question to the child because you know what happens to this child coming alone to this. We don't need an imagination to not think about what happens to the people that make this journey, especially children alone. So this question, even lawyers, the system that we have to play within, is also very shameful. In the sense that we also need to do more, and we need to have a responsibility and a duty it goes beyond our cultural identities or cultural nationalities. We need to find out where are these people, because they're dignified human beings, and we shouldn't even say that they're human beings. No. Even to even make the argument makes no sense. They're extended community members, they're extended family, and I wish, my hope is that we're able to create a better world where we know where each person can be identified, can be found, and we can know where all those people are. And I'll end it there. And I can share the PowerPoint, I guess, through a different link for those that are watching online. But just you can get more information in our website. There's many ways you can get involved. Within detention resistance, we provide orientations once a month, but we always need people answering the phones on our hotline. We also coordinate with Freedom for Immigrants, and they maintain a national hotline among more than 96 detention centers in the U.S. So there's many organizations you get involved in answering those phones, talking to somebody that you don't know, just to know their story, to be able to record quiénes son, because we don't know what's going to happen to them. And that's something that kind of keeps us doing the work that we do here in San Diego and in our respective community with the Old Mesa Detention Center. Gracias. But this is Esperanza in 2020. What's so interesting about Esperanza is me about also the story in chapter 3. It's about 2 Guatemalan young women coming to the border and having. Is it going to work? Oh. But the grandmother wrote on their dresses, on their sleeve, the number of their mother, and told them, do not take this dress off. Do not take it off. So the 2 young girls ended up going with the coyote, and the daughters knew not to take off the dress because they couldn't remember the phone number of their mother. So she embroidered that phone number on the sleeve of their dresses. Esperanza is from Guatemala. She only spoke Quiche when she made her journey. She was 17. She turned 18 within the detention center. Being a year and a half in the detention center, she learned how to speak Spanish. So she didn't even know how to even write her own name. She will put an X in her signature. So Esperanza was somebody that was really, she had a very hard journey along the border with her primas. She didn't know where her primas ended, but she was able to make it. And up to this day, she doesn't know who they are. But she is right now I believe she's in Chicago. She's with una tía, and she speaks Spanish, and she learned how to speak Spanish within being a year in a detention center. When she went to court and saw the judge asked, do you speak Spanish? And she said no. They couldn't find an interpreter of Quiche until a year and a half later, until she was able to acquire a lawyer. But the whole time she was speaking, she didn't know how to even communicate or even write. So I just wanted to share that last testimony. But there she was sharing about not knowing Spanish.
Mesa, Centro de Detención. ¿Cuánto tiempo estaba adentro?
1 año con 7 meses. 1 año.
1 año.
1 año con 7 meses. Casi 1 año con 8 meses. Allá, pues dijo. Gracias a Dios, y aprender tantas cosas no tienes, y aprender todos. Allá me sobres muchos. Y también allá no hay meses, me dejan allá no hay meses, y también no sabe español, no hay meses. Y no sabe español. Me entrevistar, a mí no más entrevistas, nada, y no sabe español, y no intérprete para buscar en quiché. Me fui la juez. De la juez habla español. Si nada más entendí las palabras, no entiende español. Dijo, no, a mí no español.
Dijo, ¿segura? Sí, me dijo, a mí no español. Sí, sí, yo soy español. Sí, yo soy español. ¿Sabes español muchos? No te preocupes, voy a explicar todos. Dijeron, no, dijo, hoy no hay nada que, no, aquí no hay quiche. Dijeron, yo me escucho, no hay quiche. Dijo, ¿qué voy a hacer no hay quiche? Tengo 7 cortas.
We have when she was released, she came to the Centro Cultural, Raza, and I was able to interview her. So I have like a few hours of her sharing her story, and I still need to. It's been transcribed. It just needs to be put together. But thank you.
Apologies about the technology. We wanted to leave some time to open it up to questions to our panel. Do I need to get on here? Okay. I'll move over to the side. But I want to invite the audience, if anybody has any questions, comments, si tienen alguna pregunta, comentarios. And can we please give these fierce mujeres a round of applause? Their work is so inspiring and amazing. And I'm happy that we're able to start the conversation kind of referencing a novel, but really that's just kind of the starting point to have these important conversations. When we were meeting prior to the event, they were asking about, do we need to hold back with anything? What is it, being in a public space? But I think it's important that we acknowledge and that we look at our history, even if it's hard, and that we really acknowledge what is happening on the ground and what has happened throughout history. I think immigration has impacted all of us in different ways. So I really want to thank them for being themselves, for being transparent, and for the work that you all are doing to have these important conversations and to present this information and to students in public spaces, on the ground, to folks that need to hear it. So again, I want to open it up to anybody that may have some comments. There is a microphone here if you wanted, just because we do have a high live stream audience. If you're still with us, hola. If you wanted to step up to the mic or even ask it from where you are at so we can engage and have a dialogue. Anybody? Qué calladitos. ¿Alguien? ¿Alguna pregunta? ¿Comentario? Any comments? Any? No?
Has anybody read the novel or any of the books? Is that the reason why you came?
We have one person that's read the novel. So that is, 2 people. 3. Okay, several of us. And that's okay, because we want, hoping that, when you leave today, the novel is a material for the program, so you can take it away. You can, sit with it. You'll have the options of taking the essays or the novel, but you don't need to have read the novel to come to the conversation, right? And that's important for us as well. Did you have a comment or a question back there? This is one of my fellow librarians, so that's why I'm being very formal with him.
So I was just wondering, what kind of action are you hoping to inspire with this panel? What would you like us, this group, to take away from this? What would you like to see us do as a result of this program?
No, I guess to that question is that I guess to one's own comfort. I wish everybody could be much more active, but it all depends. I think a present issue right now is Title 42. For those that are not familiar with Title 42, that's something that a policy that was enforced by the Public Health and Human Services in the U.S. to prevent people from coming to the U.S. because of health reasons. And it's a completely us living on the border region and crossing the border on a daily basis, or living in Tijuana. We know that that's completely it's ridiculous, just to be nice. that we're able to cross the border as being U.S. citizens or being permanent residents, and people that are seeking asylum are not able to do the same. So Title 42 is a present issue right now for you guys to be able to call, if you guys be able to reach to your local representatives and be able to call and just be able to put a stop to Title 42. You can also hashtag that. And I think that's the action happening tomorrow with Haitian British Alliance. They're organizing an action at the Alta Mesa Detention Center to also provide more visibility about Title 42. So that's something happening tomorrow. And there's a vigilia, a vigil for Dia de Muertos on Thursday, also at the Alta Mesa Detention Center, organized by the Freedom All Coalition. So there's different organizations to get involved. At the same time, with detention resistance, you can volunteer once a week, just answering the phone. Answering the phone. If you want to be able to have a pen pal, you want the right people inside the detention center. We also we can partner you up with somebody within the detention center. So there's different forms of getting involved depending on one's own comfort level. People just want to be able to write letters from the comfort of their home, so be able to answer the phone call once a week. We have many options available at the time. And more than anything, for you guys that have connections to many family members, so that are in detention centers or have family members or community members, help them find their loved ones in ICE locator. Help them be able to search what is it that they can, you can help them be able to acquire more rights within the detention center as well. So I would just encourage all of you guys, because we all have somebody that we know that's undocumented, that's living in the shadows. Support those people that are in need. Give them the resources to be able to acquire the resources that they're able to get, and support them.
And then we do have an audience questions from the live stream coming to me via text. Now technology is working. Just kidding. I want to know, and it's along the same veins of the question that Bob posed, is I want to know tangible ways to turn our anger into action. So I don't know if, I know Ymoat shared some ways to get involved. I don't know if América or Rosie, you have any advice on kind of turning, like, you're listening to a lot of these things, you have a reaction, you're feeling anger is a valid feeling. So how can we turn some of that into action?
We, in the handout that's on the chairs, there's a list of San Diego organizations that do humanitarian work against borders and detention centers. So use it as a reference. And all these different organizations do different work as well too. So research them, see what they're about. And, also, what you can do is really important, right? Because burning out, right, is a thing, right? Within activist work.
Maybe you can show this on the camera, so folks, we can make that available to people that register on the live stream. It's hard to see.
I guess I just wanted to add to what my compañeras have already mentioned. This is an ongoing dialogue that I have with myself, with my students, and thinking about that we can't do this alone. Building connections. One of my really dear friends says we weren't ever meant to make connections. So I'm kind of like echoing her sentiments. And these are radical connections, urgent connections that it's important to be making, to be seeing ourselves in relationship to others. And I guess one other thing that was told to me también is, and what I tell to my students is, what are your skills? What are your strengths? You're an artist, you're a songwriter, you're no sé, ¿qué más?
Bilingual.
You're a hacker, honestly. You know what I mean? So like, bring your skills. We need everybody.
Any other? Oh, I'm like.
Shall I just say it?
Oh, okay.
Khalid Alexander from YouTube is wondering, have you always been engaged in this important social justice and abolition work? If not, what is it that you do the work that made you do the work today? And thank you for everything that you three are doing.
I think books and libraries and public libraries and anything that pertains to the public, to a collective, is the initial work. As far as me, I think I was like 15, still in high school. I lived close to Hillcrest, and there was this book store called La Casa del Libro on University Avenue. And I remember once I saw like a flyer with like someone with a ski mask, and I was like very intrigued. And I was like, what's up with that? You know, I want to come check it out. I came, I had courage, right? I had curiosity. And, you know, next thing I'm part of like, I am selling school bonds for schools for Chiapas to tourists in Old Town, right? Because, you know, as a result of that, you know, I got drawn into activism. So I think, you know, human care, right? You know, it's probably at the heart of this, right? You know, it doesn't have to happen to our kids, you know, for it to matter to us that there's kids, you know, without their parents, right?
I guess what was the spark? Is that question?
Yes, and getting involved. Have you always been involved in activism, or what has sparked this, motivated this, inspired this?
I would say like my lived experiences, seeing my parents work multiple jobs. My mom worked when she had initially crossed the border. My dad hearing those stories of you know, they would make us work, and then afterwards they would drop us off somewhere so they wouldn't have to pay us, and they knew that we wouldn't say anything because they knew that they were undocumented. And so those stories, and my mom was like, I'm going to go to work and me voy a agachar la cabeza. I'm going to lower my head so that nobody notices me, right? So like hearing those stories growing up, my abuelita, I remember laying next to her in bed, and she had a green card, and she would make me read to her the questions that they would ask her in the interview. And mind you, she did not know any words except for ice and store. And I think just hearing those stories, and then I think going to college, undergrad, pursuing, you know, in college, you know, I would see those experiences, those faces similarly. And that's why I got involved with like incarcerated youth and car wash workers, you know, from LA, and then kind of, you know, just interested in making this world a better place so that nobody else has to go through that.
My dad tells me you should have become a lawyer if you care so much. But then the lawyer's attached to everything else, and I'm happy being the work that I do, and I do know a little bit. I learn by myself. But I think something that really hit the nerve, besides hearing the stories of my parents crossing the border at various times, and was my uncle, who was he got caught crossing the border, and he was detained for 5 years just for being caught. So that was kind of like a punishment. And then I realized that was also a policy of the criminalization of aspect of being, now you're charged. So many migrants that are being accused of as being, that have a criminal backgrounds, is literally just, many of it is just crossing the border again. And now you have a criminal record. And that criminal record stayed. And it just seemed like, how is it that somebody can take somebody's 5 years of their life and just detain them for no reason? And how many of thinking how many more people are just detained years of their lives, years taken away from their families, not being able to work and provide for them. So this injustice that is so present. And I think that more community members should share more about these things. But the unfairness of people being detained for years, and who gives those years back to those people that have been detained? So that's what drives me more, of just everything that happens within the system. But that particularly, not knowing when people are going to be released within detention centers, and just being able to hold them indefinitely, not knowing when they're going to be released. And just thank you.
And to follow up that question, can you talk about the importance of solidarity in the work that you do? Anyone?
This is solidarity, right? Checking in with each other.
I think it's that, like, it's such a big question, such an important question. So the importance of solidarity. Well, I guess I can seeing how we're interconnected, how we are accountable to each other. I think for me, the importance of solidarity came through community. I think, for me, I know I was in conversations when my, fellow peers, there was conversation of how the same borders that were built here in Mexico are the same borders that are built in Palestine. The same technologies that are used against immigrants are the same ones that are being used against, protesters fighting for in Black Lives Matters movements. I myself, I think thinking about how I'm in relationship to other people, like I'm situated on Kumeyaay land, right? Like, what does it mean for myself coming from immigrant family to be here on Kumeyaay lands and seeing how this system has been brutal across, and thinking about really none of us are free until all of us are free, until our Black communities are free, Palestine is free, like thinking, yes, hasta que caiga, dice la compañera. So solidarity is key to organizing against this huge machine, right? So no sé, compañeras, if you all want to add to it. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes. Beautiful. Our student mentee has a question. So I am very curious to hear this question. Anthony, can you step up to the mic, please? I'm putting Anthony on the spot. We're teaching you well, my friend.
I was just curious because a lot of people my age, a lot of youth my age have the type of mentality like it is what it is, kind of just deal with it, play by the rules, and they'll see this type of issue or these issues happening, and they'll kind of just like rip it off like, it is what it is, let's just deal with it. And clearly you guys don't have the mentality, speak out on certain issues. What would you say to people like that who can think like that, like maybe they have this sort of mentality? And what would you say to people who are a little too timid or shy or, just they don't care enough to speak on these problems that are very prevalent?
And for reference, Anthony is in high school age. I won't say specific age, but so when he mentions people my age, so thank you, Anthony.
High school's tough. I remember when I was doing my minor in education at UCSD, I had this idea, I'm gonna teach high school so I can push a whole bunch of my people to college, right? And then I went to high school, I went to Lincoln High to do my little internship, and I was like, oh, I can't, precisely because of the apathy, precisely because of like their hearts are so raw, they've turned into rocks, right? Because of like so much mis-schooling, right? Because of so much misinformation, right? Because they teach you, they don't teach about the U.S.-Mexico, history. They don't teach you that this land was Kumeyaay. They don't teach you that this land was Mexican once. They don't teach you that, you shouldn't call Mexican, Chicano, or, brown people as immigrants because they're actually like native people, right? So I think once people kind of like start to let their hearts become more tender, right? Again, right? When you teach courage, when you teach tenderness, when you teach care, right? Then that becomes something beautiful. That becomes something like a normal, right? This is how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be human beings, right? But we've been dehumanized for so long because of the misschooling, right?
I guess, thank you, Anthony, for the question. I guess I could add, when I hear conversations like that with my students, I think I think about the fact that this idea of the status quo is meant to be the norm and is what is being taught to us and what we're expected to do. So I think that the power of thinking creatively, alternatively from the status quo that has been fed to us I think it's contextualizing that, right? Like, who benefits from it is what it is, right? And who benefits and at whose expense? And I think when we think about that, como dice la compañera, we humanize each other. We're not supposed to in this system, right? So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Just to add to las compañeras, what they said is, and also going back to the solidarity también is, I think all these interconnected struggles they're all connected. It's not, we're not just going to come and do a march for Black Lives Matter and then do a march against police. They're not all separated. We're not going to just do a protest for migrants. Every single thing is connected. And I would say, look at your parents. Are they struggling to pay rent? Are they struggling to put food at the table? In your classroom, do you have access to books? Do you have access to materials? Not every single school is the same. Not every single library is the same either. There's lack of resources in different communities. So when you think about these questions and being able to imagine your parents, I look at my parents as well. So all these things are all connected. And then, like América goes back, who's benefiting from the conditions that are set right now? And what is it that we can do? And sometimes it seems like it's unimaginable to be able to change things because the government or the money with the resources, there's so much power. But even with everything that's happened right now, there is power in numbers. And so I would say, like, what is it that something motivates you to get up in the morning? Whatever that is, something motivates you. So whatever that fire that motivates you, or whatever that you're watching, something, focus on that. Try to change that thing. You don't need to change the entire system, but change that thing that motivates you to wake up every morning, or to change the conditions of your living conditions where you are with your family or your school or your community. And once you get older, well, you have amazing professors waiting for you to educate you more.
And we're mostly just waiting for y'all. Like, we're following y'all's lead, So, yeah.
And I don't know about you, América, but I the new generation. I mean, I think the way that you've appropriated digital media and into storytelling and to transforming, for instance, the students in Florida organized against mass shootings, right? I mean, the young really are kind of leading the way. I think I see more hope than you see in your generation. In other words,
could I add one more thing? One of my really good friends, she was like, "What is that wrench that you can toss into that machine? That can kind of make it wobble, and all of us carry a wrench. So it's like, what's your wrench? And if enough of us put all these wrenches in, va a caer."
And I do. Oh, that is not a good shot of me. Okay, let me get out. I do want to be mindful of time, but I also want to mention we have some fierce educators here in the audience. And I kind of, I and Don and Andy, I'm kind of looking at you and what you're doing in your classrooms to inspire students. And I know, sorry to put you on the spot, and I know we're talking, I want to say you do campaign-based learning. Is that what you're calling it? I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that, and then we'll close this out, or just a quick snippet. Ahí está el micrófono, Don, next to you there. Sorry, I'm just putting folks on blast here.
Okay. So my name is Don, and this is my compañera Erendira, and we teach at Lindsay Community School down in Logan. Hey, and so I guess something that we try to embark on in our teaching and in our pedagogy as educators is the idea that students can change their material conditions, right? And this is something that can be tackled as a high school student, right? As a curriculum. We don't have to wait, until they're in their neighborhood or they're in college or whatever, right? That this is something that can start early on, right? Throughout education. So the students, find campaigns that they want to engage in and work they want to engage in to change actual conditions in their community, right? So not like a beach cleanup or something like that, right? It's more like, how do we get ice out of the barrio? How do we, teach each other and our families their rights when they're encountered or stopped by the cops every fucking day? So, these are the kinds of, and then we, choose a campaign as a school, and then we build all of our curriculum around it, right? So Erendira does the English, I do the history, we have a math and science teacher. And so that's kind of like the work that we're doing, but we call it campaign-based learning. And this is what we're engaged in. So, I'm sad that I didn't know Rosie was a high school teacher at one point. If you want to, right. But, all the work that these, yes, we have a pipeline. The pipeline Absolutely. From the high school. But we just also want to add our respect from all the students and the teachers at Lindsay to the work that these mujeres are engaged in and that Addie's engaged in, right? This is solidarity, right? The libraries, Absolutely. The colleges, the schools, the community. So what a beautiful night. And thank you so much for letting us share.
Thank you, Don. 100%, yes. And I want to leave you with that. If y'all don't mind, I'll close this out, if that's okay. My biggest gratitude and respect to these mujeres, to you all for joining and taking time of your schedule, coming out during, still kind of roller coaster times, and our educators and our students. And I want to leave us with that, because this is a dialogue that can continue. This is something that we can take away and maybe be inspired in our own spaces, whether it's a conversation with a family member, whether it's, bringing it back to your spaces of work and learning and kind of saying, hey, we want to get more involved, whether it's joining some of these organizations or giving resources to those organizations that are supporting this work. I want you all to kind of think about that and see, or whether it's leading with that, showing that kindness, courage, and care. I hear the passion in the voices of these mujeres, and I feel it. And I hope that you all are inspired and that you all feel it. And I know you're here because you feel it. So I want to thank you all again. Súper aplauso para nuestro panel de esta noche. A big applause to you all. And just some housekeeping things. I'll leave us on a fun thing. Dia de la Familia, aquí in Logan Heights Library, this Thursday, October 28th at 3:30. If y'all want to bring the kiddos or anybody to Dia de los Muertos crafts, resource fair, free raffle prices, family-friendly movie. Come back to this beautiful space and join us for Dia de la Familia. You have surveys on your chairs. If you could just quickly fill out the survey and turn it in back there to get your book. But don't worry, it's not a quiz. You don't have to answer all the questions. But please do take the learning material with it. Read the book. That could be an action item for you all. We have, you could choose the novel or the essay, and have a wonderful, wonderful noche. Muchísimas gracias a todos.